Okay, so I wanted to quickly introduce my feed reading pipelines. So basically how I read text on the internet, like blog posts and articles. And I mean, as you saw in the thumbnail, the basic idea is to find stuff to read with Commafeed, import it into READECK, and then import the highlights into Logseq. And yeah, I'm going to go into the details of each of these. So mainly what I want to introduce is READECK, which is this really cool open source read later software where you can save all your articles and blog posts to and make highlights and like archive them, yeah, etc. But first of all, I mean, where do I find stuff to read? For example, on Hacker News, they usually have pretty interesting articles, or Lobsters is also a good one. And I mean, if you keep browsing those sites, at some point you're going to find some blogs or some resources that you like. And the easiest way to keep track of all these resources is to use an RSS reader like Commafeed. I'm pretty sure it's open source and you can also self-host it, but you can also just make a free account on the official instance. And I mean, if you have some blog that you like, usually somewhere at the bottom you will find an RSS feed that you can just copy, and then you can come into Commafeed and just add the link here. I mean, in my case, I've already got that one, and yeah, that way you can easily keep track of what every blog is publishing. Okay, but let's get into the main part, which is READECK. And if we go to the documentation here, we can go to installation and go to compose files, which is the way I would recommend if you want to use it locally. Okay, so maybe I should mention READECK. I think they're planning to have an official hosted plan, but right now the only thing you can do is self-host it. But you don't need a server for that. You can also just use it locally on your laptop and like literally just copy paste this compose file and use docker compose up to start it. So let's create a directory where it will store the data and come and copy paste the compose file. So if you want to store it in a local directory instead of in a volume, then you have to come here and basically add the path to that directory instead of the volume name and delete the volume section that they had in the official docker compose. And now if we do, this is actually running in a distro box where I don't have Podman installed, but I'm going to run on the host machine Podman compose up-d for detach. And I mean, you can also use Docker for this, obviously. And it's going to download the container image for you, and it started. So if we do Podman or Docker ps, then you can see it's running. So I just aliased Docker to Podman, but in your case, you're just going, if you're using Docker, you're just going to be doing Docker compose up-d to start the compose.yaml file. Okay, and then on your browser, you can just go to localhost port 8000 and create a username, the password, which must be 8 characters. Okay, so now we have READECK running. Let's find some link that we want to read. Let's say we want to read this. And then I'm just going to copy the link and paste it into READECK. And by the way, there's also a browser extension for READECK, then you don't have to come in and copy the link, then you can just click on the little icon in the browser. And yeah, I mean, by default, it's going to give you a nice gallery view with all of your articles that you haven't read yet. And if we go into the article, the first thing that I usually do is I add some tags, like for example, Go, programming, or something else. And then I just go through and read it and make some highlights. Not going to actually read it, but yeah, for example, just highlighting some stuff. And so the nice thing about READECK is that it has a nice API. So that's, for my workflow, that's really important. So let's generate an API token and store it in an environment variable. Also store the URL of our READECK instance, so up to the port, essentially, in an environment variable. And then what I have in my setup is I have a little script that goes to the API and downloads the highlights. So essentially, if you go to your instance, you go to API, bookmarks, then the bookmark ID, and annotations, you can see the highlights that we made. And I just wrote a little Python script that downloads those. So you give it the article ID basically, and then it gives you a little bit of markdown that contains all the highlights as a markdown code and also contains the tags. And my current workflow is just basically just copy that and paste it into my Logseq. And this is basically because previously I was using a site called Omnivore to read blog posts and copy the highlights into Logseq, and that had a nice add-on for Logseq actually, and was also a bit better than my script because it didn't just copy the plain text but had a nice markdown formatting. But yeah, unfortunately they shut down, so I had to replace it with an open source solution. And the nice thing about READECK is that you can import your Omnivore articles, so at least I didn't lose all of my saved blog posts. And if there's any interest, I can maybe publish the Python script that I'm using, but it's literally nothing complicated. It's just, going to the API and getting the annotations and, formatting as a list of markdown quotes. And as you can see, currently my process is a bit manual because, Logseq is going through the transition to the database version. Maybe when that's done, I'm going to develop a Logseq plugin or something to automate it completely. But right now, I don't really see the point of developing a plugin for the essentially legacy version of Logseq that I'm using. And by the way, if you don't just want to export your highlights, but you want to export the whole article, it's also pretty easy to do with the API. So basically, you just use the endpoint article.md, and then you get the whole article, and it will also have your highlights as markdown highlights, so you can come in and paste this, for example, into your graph if you want the whole article. But for me, that's a bit too much. I usually prefer to just have my highlights. I think, for example, there's a READECK plugin for Obsidian, and I'm pretty sure that's probably using this article API to just paste the whole articles or something. But yeah, I'm not using Obsidian, so I don't really know. So what I also like about READECK is the fact that the way it stores the data seems to be a pretty future-proof format. So if we go into this folder that was now created and we go to bookmarks, we can see it created a zip file for our bookmark. If we just unzip it, we can see it's literally just it downloaded the static resources like images, and the text is just an HTML file. So even if, for example, READECK is not developed in the future anymore, or you're going to uninstall it or whatever, at least you still have all of your data just as plain HTML files. I think that's pretty nice. And after I'm done reading the article and importing the highlights into Logseq, then I usually just archive it here so that my home screen stays uncluttered. And there's a full text search. So if I search for something that appears in the article, for example, fake time, it will bring up the article. You can also go through a few that just shows all of the highlights that I've made. But I don't really use it that much because after you have a few thousand highlights, maybe it's not so easy to view this. And so for the hosting, again, what we're doing now is we're just running it locally on the laptop using Docker Compose. What you can also do is, obviously run it on a server. That's what I'm doing. So personally, I'm using a Netcap server just because they seem to be pretty much the cheapest and I haven't had issues with them. So you can literally just get one for €3 per month and run your Docker stuff there. You can also obviously self-host other stuff on the server and maybe even save some subscription money if you replace your subscriptions with some self-hosted open source software like READECK. But if you don't want that, if you just want to run it locally on your laptop, but maybe you still want to access it on your phone or on your e-ink reader, what you can actually do is install Tailscale on your mobile device and on your laptop, and that will basically allow you to make a peer-to-peer connection between your laptop and your phone from everywhere as long as the laptop is on. So that's another way how you can use it without having a server and obviously having all of your data completely offline and local. Okay, so ended up being a pretty short video, but that's my current workflow. I would also be interested in what your workflow is, what your pipeline basically is for getting for consuming blog articles and maybe archiving them or keeping some of the highlights in your personal knowledge management system. Okay, so until next time.